When it comes to names that have impacted the world through their works as authors and global speakers, our guest on the show today makes that list. She's a celebrated architect of literary masterpieces such as Purple Hibiscus, Half a Yellow Sun, and the National Book Critics Circle Award-winning triumph, Americana. She's a global literary icon whose work has transcended borders and found voice in over 60 languages. Her brilliance has been widely acknowledged, earning her a prestigious MacArthur Genius Fellowship and a remarkable collection of over 20 honorary doctorate degrees from the world's most distinguished institutions, including Yale University and Johns Hopkins University. 12 years after Americana captivated the world, she returns with her highly acclaimed latest novel, Dream Count, released just this March. Her extensive international Dream Count tour has taken her across the globe.
I have the absolute privilege to welcome to you today award-winning author of Americana and Half a Yellow Sun, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
It's a bittersweet symphony that's live, trying to make ends meet. You're a slave to money, then you die. I'll take you down the only road I've ever been.
And now, to our immense excitement, she's back home to kick off the Nigerian leg of this tour, right here in Lagos. Joining us now on the show to tell us more about her latest work, Dream Count, and her tour is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Good morning, Chimamanda, and welcome back home. First, I'd like to congratulate you on your This Day award, emerging as one of the women making impact in Nigeria and, of course, around the world. Your Dream Count tour has taken you across the globe since March. Now, what has been the most surprising or impactful interaction you've had with readers internationally regarding Dream Count? I know that the book marks your return to writing novels after over a decade. And you chose to center your characters around 4 African women navigating joys and disappointments across the continent. What did you find most compelling about telling the story of these characters first? And was there any particular catalyst or inspiration that led you to weave these 4 African women together?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to be back home, I have to say. Very lovely. So Dream, I think the most compelling, I should say many of the interactions have been compelling, but I think it's really hearing from women who say that they see themselves in the novel. So it's always very meaningful to me when, and also just the strength of feeling. So they'll say, this is me, you told my story, that kind of thing. But also on the other hand, people who feel very strongly about the characters and kind of respond to them as though they were real. So somebody said to me that she thought one of the characters was crazy.
Really? Okay, fantastic. I wanted to also know what, was most impactful moment you've had with touring your book. I know that you've gone around Europe already, and tell us some of the experiences you felt.
I think I have to tell you actually, Oji, I've never lost my sense of wonder. I'm still really... and I don't want to say, it's not false modesty, it is in fact true, that I go to these things and I'm just shocked that it's sold out in 24 hours, that there are 1,000 people there to see me, that the bloody paid money to see me. There's a part of me that still thinks, really, why? Right? And so that's always lovely, to just see the kind of connection that people make to my work. And also, I think I'm very moved by the idea of human connection. So people who are so different from you, and they read you and they say to you, I saw myself, right? In all of my touring, the most moving that actually brought me to tears was a woman in Copenhagen. And she just looked at me and she said to me, you make me feel stronger.
Oh, that is beautiful, beautiful. Dr. Vati?
Oh, okay. 4 characters that Tujinika mentioned. Umelogo, Kadiatu, Sikora, and the other character. Middle-aged women. Now about connections that you talked about in a turbulent world, having their individual experiences. But 2 major issues in that book. Love. What does love mean to you personally? Is there a part of that book that is biographical? And is happiness attainable? Because these are 4 middle-aged women struggling to be happy.
Is happiness attainable? Yes, I think it is. I think the pursuit of happiness is a very valid thing. Whether we find it or not is a different question. But I think that in some ways to be human is to seek happiness. And I find that very beautiful. But yes, I think it's attainable. There's an optimism in me, right, that despite all evidence, I really hold on to. But, when you call them middle-aged, for a minute I thought, wait, are they?
Wow.
It's interesting, right? Because I guess I am middle-aged, but I don't really think of myself as middle-aged. I think of when we would say middle-aged, and I would think about my mother when I was younger. Now I'm that. So
Time flies.
Life comes at you fast,
Yes.
doesn't it?
They are middle-aged. They are, but I think for me, it's not even so much about age as it is. I wanted to show different kinds of women's lives, and they're really very different. But also, I wanted to write about it very honestly, in a way that doesn't try to hide their weaknesses, their strengths, of course, their insecurities, all of those things, but how they handle them very differently. I think that I don't want to do a
Spoiler.
yes.
Love. This whole idea of finding love.
Love is the most important thing in life, I think, in addition to food. So, I really believe that. I really believe that. And I think love in its different forms, not just romantic love, but love between friends, love with family. That's what has sustained me in my life. The love of family, the love of friends. So I really think, and of course, romantic love. I've been very fortunate in that regard. And that's all I will say on the biographical question.
I thoroughly love that you indulged us by exploring the theme of motherhood. And, I know this has now spilled over into some conversations about your personal life as well, but the bigger discourse really has been about how do we intertwine the themes of motherhood with feminism, especially when we look at the complexity and the unique nature that each individual's woman's journey to motherhood may take. How do we bring it all together? Because some people are saying, this is moving away from what we understand to be feminism. How can we reconcile it all?
I do actually agree with the premise that it moves away from feminism. I think the idea that somehow feminism means that a woman doesn't want to be a mother is in fact not true. I think feminism in the end is about choices, right? And I think motherhood is a very important and central part of the lives of many women. And I know that there are women who don't want to be mothers, but of course there are many, many women who want to be, and some who want to be and can't, which I think is also a really important thing to talk about. Well, for me, obviously, motherhood has been the greatest gift that I've been given, really. But I also think that motherhood should be, it's interesting to think about how little we see of motherhood in literature. And we all came from a woman, but literature, you look back at literature and, the great works of literature almost never deal with motherhood, which I find very curious. And so in some ways, I think for me, Dream Count is also about making a case for motherhood being a valid and important, a legitimate theme in literature. And motherhood in all of its, there's a scene in the book of birthing a child, which I do not romanticize in any way, right? Because I remember once watching this film in which a woman had just had a baby. She looked perfect. She was holding the baby was silent. And I just thought, this is a lie. And so I think it's important to tell the truth, right? It's a complicated...
constipation.
Yes, nobody tells you those things. It's important to talk about them,
All right, very apt. And the fact that the tour kicks off, I think tomorrow we have a big event coming up. We'll talk about that. But let's talk about loss. This is the first novel you're going to write after suffering the loss of people you loved, which is not an easy thing. I think it was Rumi that says, the wound lets the light in. And you've been wounded by the loss of those you've loved. Can you talk us through it? Can you talk about healing, which is also a concept around the book you've just written? And can you talk about loss? And can you talk about understanding that love itself could be transient in the form you had with your dear parents that you lost?
That's a very interesting quote, but I'm not sure that my wound let any light in. I think that I experienced grief and continue to experience grief as a kind of darkness. And I was very fortunate to have the most wonderful parents. I adored them. And my whole life, my sense of identity was being the daughter of Grace and James Adichie. And it's not just that I lost them, it's also how I lost them. It was so unexpected. My father left us, and then shortly after my mother. And it just felt to me just really unbelievable. And this is the thing about grief, that it's also about denial and disbelief. You know it's happened, but you're still asking yourself, did it really happen? I still ask that about my mother in particular. I think I've made peace with losing my father. I haven't with losing my mother. And sometimes I don't actually like talking about it because I get very emotional, but at the same time, I'm very grateful to have had that, you know. And I think, of course, that we grieve because we're fortunate to have loved. But it does make you question. Sometimes I think, well, what's the point of loving if we're going to lose the people we love? But I do think that love is its own worth. I mean, I do still believe that love is a thing. I'm still very grateful to have had them, but it's very difficult. And grief changed so much. I changed. I became a different person in so many ways.
I just want to follow up on this. When I was quoting Rumi about the wood letting the light in, what let the light in that facilitated the healing as regards your dad?
That's interesting. I'm also I'm not very comfortable with language like healing. I suppose because it's also in some ways abused. Everything is about, healing. Let's seek healing. And then I start to question what it means. But maybe acceptance. And what led to it? Honestly, I don't know. I think maybe losing my mother forced me to make peace with the earlier loss, right? And I think also because most of my life, I adored my father so much that I feared losing when I would lose him. I would constantly, my father would be telling me a story. I would secretly put my phone on record because I would be thinking, my God, one day daddy won't be here. I want to have his voice. But I never thought about losing my mother. I thought my mother would be here forever.
Yeah, same here. I share your thoughts as well. I recently lost my mother, and it was a shock to me, as you know, that we have talked about this. And I know that you dedicated your book to your mother. And I'd like to know, often we've seen your novels. They they normally talk about, identity, race, feminism. And I know that you started writing after your mother passed, correct? Talk to me about how that inspired the theme for Dream Count. Do you see your mother in any of these women that you wrote about? I know it's fiction, but did that inspire any of your characters in your book?
Not directly, no. But I really do think that my mother helped me. I really deeply believe that my mother guided me. And when I was sort of almost done with the book, I went back to read it, and I felt it was such an emotional thing because I realized my mother's spirit was there. And it's a thing that's difficult to speak about intellectually because it's intuitive, it's spiritual, And of course, I started writing after she died. And I really do think that it was her way of helping me cope. She must have known that otherwise I would completely fall apart. And my mother was a very fierce supporter of women. After she passed away, we heard so many stories that we hadn't heard before. People, and this is the thing I really want to say to people, give people their flowers when they're still here. Absolutely. Do not wait until they die. I think that birthdays should be more like funerals. People should come and talk about you. They should. Yes. When my mother passed away, there were people who came to us and said she gave me a job, she helped me with school, and we did not know. And they never told her. I mean, they never came back to say, you've made a difference in my life. And so my mother was a very fierce supporter of women. And of course, in her life, she was unapologetic about her ambition. She became the first registrar of the University of Nigeria. And I have to tell you very, very quickly a story about the first meeting she had after she became registrar. Okay. And the sign had always said chairman because it had always been men who chaired the meetings. And so my mother sat down to start the meeting and she said, a clerk ran up to her and said, oh, sorry, madam, we want to change it to chairperson. And my mother said, leave it there. I'm the chairman.
I'm the chairman.
Well, it's interesting you say birthdays should be like funerals. Did I hear you well?
Yes.
Because in my head, I remember Professor Femi Oshofison, who wrote a piece saying birthdays are not for dying, but the contest we
Yes,
can look at differently.
Yes, but Prof is despite being a genius,
Yes.
Professor Shofison, I will have to say that, well, maybe the context is different.
Yes,
so
it's context. It's a matter of context.
What I mean by that really is that, in the way that funerals, people come, and there's a dead body in a casket, and there are all of these people there, and I'm thinking, this person in the casket doesn't know what you're doing. It's so much better if we do things when people are still there.
Okay.
Sometimes people pass away and you're just full of regrets about what you didn't say, and then you go to the funeral and you say all of these things, but they're not there anymore.
Okay, I get the context now. The question I wanted to ask you is, okay, you've done the world tour, in literate communities where people will read anyway, and you said the book sold out in 24 hours. When you are coming home, is there a personal or artistic reason why you want to do a book tour in Nigeria where book distribution is a problem? Many of the bookstores no longer exist. The few ones that exist that I checked, you go to some of them that you think are big. They say, oh, we've run out of copies. Oh, we don't have dream count. How are you going to get the books into the bookstores and make sure that, this poorly, literate population tries to read your book?
No. Okay, Ruben, I'm going to disagree with you saying that Nigerians are not literate. That is the suggestion.
Well, we don't buy books. Reading culture. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this is true. Yes and no. I think it's also about books being affordable and available. There's a reading community here. I did a signing the last time I was home, and it was incredible, and especially young people. Honestly, I felt, because like you, I would think, Nigerians don't read, how do we get them reading? But I saw all of these young, very, very enthusiastic people.
We have book clubs, but we can't have them.
But also, I think that the reading culture problem isn't a particularly Nigerian one. I think it's all over the world. There are countries in Scandinavia are known for still really being very good at reading, but generally, everyone's become occupied by screens and the mindlessness of social media. Don't get me started on that. But no, my publisher is here with me. I think that the independent publishers in this country who are trying, who are really trying. And for me, the goal is what do we do to make this better? There are going to be people in this country who will never read novels, and that's fine. That's their loss. But how do we get the people who are interested to read more? And I think it can be done. So this is why, for example, it's always important to me to have a Nigerian edition of my books. I keep the Nigerian rights so that we can publish an edition that's affordable, right? Because if we sell the foreign ones here, it doesn't make sense. So I think things like that, there are wonderful bookstores. I can recommend some for you that have the copies of Dream Counts.
You think I don't know that?
I'm curious about Kadiatu, who was, of course, fictionally based on Nafisatu Dallo, the Ghanaian woman who had accused Dominic Strauss-Kahn of sexual assault. Why her, and what do you hope to shape through her inclusion in Dream Count?
Well, the second part of the question, what do I hope to shape? Which is interesting. I hope to remind readers of the very basic and ordinary humanity of women in positions like hers. I think it's very easy for women who are thrust in the public light because they've accused a powerful man of sexual assault to become limited to that. So she just becomes that person that accused him. And I am hoping that by sort of fictionalizing her story, giving it a fuller sense of humanity, this is a woman who had dreams, who had hopes. You read about the coverage of that incident, the real incident, so Nafisatu Jello and Dominic Strauss-Kahn, and the coverage was just incredible in how different it was. We heard about him as a human being, about all the dreams that he might have to forfeit, because people thought he was going to be the next president of France, right? So we heard about all the ways in which his life would change, and there was a sense in which we were supposed to feel a kind of empathy and even pity for him. But with her, it was incredible. It was endlessly negative. Is she out for money? Is she in a prostitution ring? All of that. And so I felt very wounded by that, personally, but also on behalf of her And so many women like her. This is why women do not come forward when they've been sexually assaulted. And so I think that for me, the story is about, let's just remember that, these women are human beings and that they too have lost a lot.
I mean, I'm very apt, because the narrative around her then was, hotel chambermaid, denigrating narrative. In fact, some people said she was contracted to stop the socialist ambition of Dominic Strauss-Kahn. But I want to push it further. I want to talk about, number one, the business of literature and reading and education in a society where there's poverty and there are contending forces. It looks as though we have a political class that, with a devaluation in our economy, tries to stifle the potential of people to be able to get things done. Literature is suffering. That intellectual interaction is no longer there. I mean, so you're trying to balance that kind of society. Yes, you saw enthusiasm by some young people, but it's also very narrow. It's not collective. It's not the way you want it to be, because you have contending forces of poverty as heaped on us by the political class, and balancing that tough, wheel in society is a very difficult one, because there's just a deliberate attempt, at ensuring that people do not read in the country. They took history out of the curriculum at a point and things like that. We don't want stories to be told. For instance, your book, I told the story of the Biafran War. I remembered how it was censored in the cinema when the film came out for a bit, So those hard stories, people don't want to talk about them.
Yeah. But can I also just say that this is, again, not just a Nigerian problem.
Yes.
So I'm constantly asked everywhere I go about my books that were banned in the US. And I'm very happy to be in that august group, because it's a wonderful collection of books that have been banned for political reasons. But really, to your point, I mean, I want to say, first of all, that I don't think it's necessarily about poverty. I think it's also about what we value. There are many poor countries, relatively poor countries, where people, because they value certain things, still make it a priority. I've been worried that in the past 30, 40 years, something has happened to us. You read about 1960s Nigeria, and it wasn't perfect, but you felt that people value things that mattered more. I think there's a kind of crass materialism that we've kind of embraced. So inside of that poverty, there's just a slightly crazed sort of value for material things. But I don't think that comes necessarily from poverty. We've lost the way in some ways.
What do you think it comes from?
Because you look at other African countries that are poor, and they're not as materialistic as Nigeria. So I think it's a question of, I have various theories. I think that maybe in some ways that military dictatorships did something to our psyches. And so we all kind of went collectively mad. I think that is one. But I'm not sure I know exactly why, but it is a reality. And we can see that by just going to other poor countries and looking at what they value and what they think about, and seeing that Nigeria is really different in its just crazy materialism. But I also think, government is so important. The leadership you have makes a huge difference. Leadership sets the tone. If we had leadership that valued certain things, things would change. Mm-hmm. So I really think in the end, leadership makes a huge difference, even in the midst of poverty.
So before we wrap up, the book tour is starting in Lagos.
Yes.
Which other locations are you visiting?
And
why Lagos, our city?
Lagos tomorrow?
You seem to like Lagos.
Well, I live in Lagos. So I have a home here. Okay. I spend half the year here, but I'm always hiding at home. Right. So people don't often know that I actually live here. Lagos, Lagos, I love Lagos. Lagos is a city after my heart. And of course, my home is here. And whether or not we like it, Lagos is the beating heart of Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And so that's why Lagos first. Yeah. So Lagos tomorrow at the Muson Center. And then after that, Abuja, which we also have to include, because we're managing Abuja. You're supposed to laugh at that. Thank you. And then And then I'm going to Enugu, which is where I was born. And then I'm also going to Nsukka, which is where I grew up. So it's really a real wholesome homecoming for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
But really quickly, what are we supposed to expect tomorrow? Because I'm going to be there, and I want our viewers to know.
We're going to have music, we're going to have poetry, we're going to have spoken word, and then I'm going to read a bit, and then I'm going to be in conversation, and we will talk about reading and literature and love and dreams and everything.
And the tickets are out on sale till now, right?
Yes.
For tomorrow. Where is that
Yes.
on? What is it? TEFX? I forget what you sent it to me. I forgot what it was
I don't
again.
actually
Yeah,
know
okay, I will find it, but you can get
But
the
I think if
tickets
people go to
online.
Narrative Landscape Press, which is my
Narrative
publisher.
Landscape.
Yes.
Well, 12 years after Americana, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie would like to congratulate you and thank you very much for joining us on the morning show. You have made Nigeria proud.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been lovely being here. Thank you.
All right, that's all on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, renowned author. We'll take